So let's look at the macronutrient fat. What does fat do for you? Understanding fat better and how you can improve your fat consumption right now. So guys, when it comes to fat, I'd like to talk about two different types of fat. The first is the fat that you consume, and that is basically saturated and unsaturated fat. But actually, I don't want to talk about its saturates, so I want to talk about its type and where it comes from. So a lot of people, or a lot of clients that I work with, and a lot of people in general, have a really confused or misconception around fat and animal fat. A lot of people think that animal fat is purely just saturated fat, and that's not completely true. When you're looking at animal meat, the fat from that is actually a natural source of fat. Now, if you go to something like a vegetable oil, such as a rapeseed oil or possibly a sunflower oil, that isn't really a natural form of fat. And the reason why is because it's obviously been through a process where we've had to gain or get the oil from that seed. And the problem with that is because we don't actually obtain fat naturally through that process, it makes us wonder, is it actually good for us in the first place? Let's just hone in on that for a second. The fat that you cook your food in is really important to make sure that you're getting the right type of fat. Now, years and years ago, we used to cook with things like butter and lard, but now we very much cook with fats that are from vegetables or seeds, such as like a rapeseed oil or a sunflower seed. Think about it for a second. There is no natural way to be able to consume vegetable or seed oil in these vast quantities. The oil that you cook with, such as rapeseed oil, for example, hasn't actually got to you via a natural process. It's been processed by us, by agriculture. And so therefore, it's not a natural way to be able to consume the fat that we do need. But when you look at animal fat and any fat that you find within animals, whether it be fatty fish or fatty meat, it's a lot more natural. Now, when we look at seed oil, such as rapeseed oil, it has been marketed to us very well. It's been marketed to us that it's healthier to eat the oil from a seed rather than eating the fat from an animal. But there's a slight problem with that. And the problem is that the molecule inside vegetable oils or seed oils oxidizes very fast. And so that isn't good for you. That basically means that it breaks down at a hell of a rate. So what is oxidization? Oxidization is basically when you look at a piece of metal and it has rust on it. The rust is reacting with the oxygen within the atmosphere, and that is basically oxidization. And it's exactly the same thing. It's a breakdown that's happening within your body when you're consuming those types of oils. So if I were you, what I would look at doing is turning to things such as butter, coconut oil, or perhaps even sometimes using a little bit of lard or natural animal fat, because they don't break down the same way as the oil from a seed does. So when you look at animal fats, there are a lot more natural source of fat. When you look at an egg, or you look at steak, or you look at salmon, the fat that's within those meats are naturally found. And also the molecules within those fats react differently. What's happened is that we have been marketed vegetable and seed oil because it sounds healthier. It sounds like it's much better for us, but actually it isn't that good for us. And that's because of the molecule that oxidizes within the body. So guys, the second type of fat is the fat that's stored around your body. And they come in two different types. They are subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that's stored around your body. And then you have visceral fat, which is the fat that's stored within the body. Subcutaneous fat is basically fat cells that are around things such as the abdomen. So when you see someone who's got a little bit of a belly, that basically means that they are storing fat around their abdomen. When you're looking at visceral fat, that's fat that is stored within the organs. So basically your body puts fat where it can, and if the human or the person starts to consume more calories than it actually needs, it's more likely that the visceral fat will start to go up as well as the subcutaneous fat. Now, the strange thing about subcutaneous fat is we basically only have a limit as to how much we can actually store. So we have a storage facility where we hold fat, and basically that's actually quite a healthy thing. If your body has just got a layer of subcutaneous fat around it, but your visceral fat is actually quite low, we would consider you to be relatively healthy. It just basically means that your body is storing more energy than is needed. Now, it's not necessarily a beach body, but it is still a healthy body. So if visceral fat becomes too high, that basically means that the organs are working a lot harder than they should be. And if we look at the pancreas is the organ that makes the hormone insulin. So inside your pancreas are these cells called beta cells, and those beta cells basically at some point get turned into insulin, and then your pancreas releases insulin, and insulin is there to be able to control the macronutrients that you consume for your food. So when you eat food, your brain basically produces or requires the amount of insulin that is needed so that the right macronutrients from the food that you eat, which is proteins, fats, and carbs, gets delivered to the right places in a very basic sense. But if the pancreas becomes too fatty, which is the visceral fat, and that fat gets too high, what happens is it's putting too much stress on the pancreas, and it's not able, the beta cells aren't able to make insulin as well. And also what happens is that because the pancreas now demands more insulin in itself to be able to store the visceral fat around the organ, things start to become not very good for the individual. So what we always need to make sure is that there are differences between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. If you've got subcutaneous fat, which is basically belly fat, you need to make sure that it doesn't get too high, because it's going to mean that the more subcutaneous fat you start to store, the levels of visceral fat are also going to start to go up as well. Now, the only way that you can really read your visceral fat is by going on like a biometric scale. You can find them in gyms, you can find them in health centers, you can find them in different clinics. But basically, you want to be able to measure or make sure that your weight doesn't go too much over the amount that you need for someone of your height, age, and sex. When you're looking at people who have got type 2 diabetes, they are individuals who've got too much visceral fat around their organs, and they've got too much visceral fat around their pancreas. Now, because of their lifestyle, because they're probably people who have more highly processed types of foods, that's going to mean that their pancreas is working harder to create insulin, but it's finding it harder to be able to create the insulin because the fact that the pancreas has got more fat around it or within it. So that basically means that those little beta cells that go to making insulin aren't being created either quickly enough or correctly, or the right dosages of insulin aren't being controlled by the body. This basically means that the blood sugar levels within that individual are starting to go awry, and from that basically means that their diabetes starts to become a problem. So to sum up, guys, when you're looking at visceral fat and you're looking at subcutaneous fat, you want to make sure that both of those remain relatively even, but you want to make sure that your visceral fat is as low as it can be, and you want to make sure that your subcutaneous fat is as low as it can be. And those things can obviously be achieved through a good diet and a healthy lifestyle.
It's the Yo Bossy Week.